Hello all, this is Roger Capello and this is installment number 6 of my week at the club. This is the second round of the Martin Lane Memorial this week and I played Alan Condon, who had the white pieces against me. Alan and I have played about 5 times at the club, and I think 4 of them I've been black and he's been white, and every time in those games he's used a system called the London system, which is characterized by moves d4 and bishop f4. And tonight was no different, but I played a little differently against it in that I countered with d5. So the opening moves were d4, d5, c4, c6. Okay, this is the Slav defense. It's not really an opening I've used much at all, but I thought it would be interesting to give it a try, especially against the London system that he's playing. I expected him to play against me, and sure enough, next move the bishop came out to f4. I posted my bishop on f5 to get it outside of the pawn chain. So after his e3 and my e6, now my bishop is outside of this triangle of pawns, and it's not caught inside where it'd be immobile. He surprised me already. There were a number of surprises in this game, not all of which were pleasant. And in this move, he played a kind of a cramping move with c5. I'm not sure it's really a good move because these pawns on c5 and d4 are subject to attack. So I can either attack at the head of the pawn chain with a b5, b6 at some, or I'm sorry, b7, b6 at some point, or I could attack the base of the pawn chain, well, one of the bases in this case, with e6 to e5 and undermine this d pawn. So there's a couple of different positional ideas already that are brought to mind for black to play against this. But for now, I thought it was important just to keep developing, getting my pieces out. So I played knight f6, and this was surprise number 2, I guess. I really didn't expect him to play f3. It seemed pretty clear at the time that he was preparing to play e4. But even with this pawn move, it's going to take at least another piece to another 2 pieces to prepare this, because I've got that square pretty well under my grip right now with this d pawn and the bishop and the knight are all focusing on this one square of e4. So I'm not sure that this is really what the position calls for at this point, but it's the direction that we went in. I continued to develop with my bishop on e2. I don't really have a lot of other choices in this case. And he surprised me again with a knight to e2. I expected the bishop to develop before that knight came out because I felt that with this knight on e2 here, the bishop will have a hard time getting out to one of the squares that it would like to be on. So that also surprised me. I continued to develop. And then he played that knight on to c3, which at least it opens up the diagonal for the bishop, but there's been an awful lot of time now spent on these extra knight moves, this pawn move up to c5, this extra pawn move to f3. And so effectively, black is now getting a lead in development. And it seems like it's about time for me to start doing something perhaps a little more active. So I played knight h5, attacking his bishop. And this was kind of a curious move to make because I'm intentionally putting my pieces where they could easily be forked. That is, he can play the pawn to g4, forking my 2 pieces. Now, I wasn't worried about this because in this particular case, my knight could trade off for the bishop. If he gets rid of the bishop by exchanging it for my knight, then I always have the safety valve of exchanging this bishop for that knight. So I'm not really in danger of losing a piece here. And the threat is simply to play my bishop out to h4 check and to either cause the king to move or to weaken the pawns on the king side. So, and also the obvious threat of attacking the bishop and threatening to trade it off. It really has no good squares to go to. What he chose to do was to trade it off immediately for my rook on b8. And this is a move I was also a little concerned about because he then could play his queen out to a5, a4 rather, and that attacks this weak a pawn that my rook used to be defending, which no longer is defending. And I really would be reluctant to play a6 because at some point this knight could work its way into the weak square on b6, which is a wonderful outpost for the knight. And that backward pawn of mine is going to be very hard to correct with his pawn exerting the influence on the b6 square here. So I was not sad to see then that he didn't play queen to a4, but actually played bishop to d3. And this seemed to fit in pretty well with my plans. I can simply trade that bishop off, and now I'm able to continue on with my idea of checking the king and trying to weaken the king side. But first I put in, before I started operations on the king side, I tried to weaken this pawn chain here in the center by attacking the pawn on c5. At this point he could trade the pawn off, but I would have been happy with that. I, of course, would have taken back toward the center and had support now for an eventual c5 and some sort of pawn activity here on the queen side. He didn't do that, and instead he just defended the pawn with b4. After he defended, probably would have been best for me to go ahead and undermine the center without resolving this situation on the queen side, but at least that's what the computer said. I don't know. I'm not totally convinced. What I did do was to exchange the pawns off, and the reason for this was I very much like this fully open file from my rook, threatening to come in at some point to b2 and then to do whatever I can along the second rank. So that seemed to create a reasonable threat within the position, and now it's my move. I can continue on with the idea to undermine these pawns. But of course, if he takes this e-pawn, then I can just simply take the c-pawn in return. And black's got a very nice position here. White hasn't even castled yet, and I'm getting a lot of play. If he were to go ahead and castle at this point, I could, for example, just play the knight in and attack the queen, because this pawn on e3 is pinned. So he did not take the e-pawn at this point, but instead played knight to d2, which I guess is understandable. White wants to get his pieces out into the game. It seems like kind of an awkward placement of the knights, though, on the queen side there, and allowed me to continue on with an idea of exchanging the pawns. And now he takes back with the queen. Now, Alan actually thought for quite a while here, and what would happen if he took with the pawn is that this e-file can very quickly get opened up for my rook. So I could, for example, I was thinking about playing bishop to g4, or h4 check, rather. The king has to do something. I'd be happy if it moved, but if he blocks with the pawn, I can continue on with rook to e8 check, and now the king really does have to move, and then I could retreat the bishop. After the king moves, say here, I could come back and attack this d-pawn in the center that's been weakened. So this is getting to be quite a promising position for black here with the white's king stuck in the center. For that reason, Alan didn't take with the pawn, but rather he took with the queen. And the nice thing about that for black is that that permanently weakens this pawn now on c5. It's isolated and is pretty much going to be mine for the winning if I want to win it. So one of the possibilities after, well, first I played bishop to f6, which I think is a good move regardless. And the queen has to go somewhere where it still defends this knight, and the only reasonable square that it can do that from is d3. And now I could continue on with the queen coming out to a5, putting a double attack on this square. I figured he would play rook to c1 because he couldn't move the knight because the bishop is attacking the rook through the knight. The knight is pinned, and by playing the rook over, he solves two problems at once. He gets out of the pin and also protects this knight a second time. But I can continue attacking on the queen side, perhaps with rook to b2. But I didn't like the kinds of continuations where he might think about playing knight to b3. And now this was a little unclear to me. I had a place to go with my queen, but I wasn't too fond of this continuation. It seemed a little too complex. The computer favors that, but what I did instead in this position after the queen stepped back was to immediately take the knight, and he took back with the queen. And that allows me to come out and check him from h4. And now, of course, the pawn can't afford to block because I'd simply take it with the knight. And if he took back with the pawn, that pawn was pinned. I'll take his rook check. Thank you very much. And black is doing, well, black's basically winning at this point. So that's not something he can afford to do. After the check, instead he has to move the king, and he wanted to get it off the back rank so that his rooks were connected. And he played to e2. Now, that's interesting for me because it means that at some point when my rook gets to b2, I'll be attacking. This king is a target along that second rank, and this knight could become pinned. There are various possibilities that come up in the position. So I continue to apply the pressure by playing rook over to e8, put it on the half-open file, and that, of course, attacks this pawn, which right now is adequately defended, but there are threats such as pawn up in the air because this pawn will be pinned. So if he did something that didn't adequately address that issue, then there are some combinations. So actually, I missed one combination here that's fairly enlightening. So what he did was to force my queen away from that diagonal. And I went into h6, where I'm threatening to penetrate. And then he played rook to b1. After rook b1, black has the startling resource that was shown to me by the computer. I didn't see it, pushing the d pawn. Now, if white were to continue on in this situation, ignoring the attack to his queen, rook takes rook. Now, it looks like I could take the queen. Obviously, if black took the queen, there's a checkmate on the back rank. That wouldn't be any good. However, black has kind of a devious reply here of queen g2 check, and the king has to move to d3 so that this rook doesn't get taken with check. And after the king moves to d3, then black can simply retake the rook, and now both this rook on a1 and the queen on c3 are under attack, and black's basically in very bad shape here. So this did not happen. In this position, after black played queen to h3, and white responded by playing his rook to b1, I played rook to b1 thinking that I was being clever, because after rook takes rook, now I can take a pawn with check. If he didn't take back with the rook, if he, say, took with the knight in this position, then I would check and just win the rook, like so. And now this rook is lost. So he has to take back with the rook, which is what he did. And I'm able to take the pawn check. So I win a pawn, that's fine. He has to move. And now I made a real blunder. Black Black's been dominating the situation here for the last 10 or so moves, and I got a little too greedy and thought that I was playing a moderately clever move, at least a good move, by coming in with my knight to take the pawn on g3. But the problem is that I didn't properly protect myself on the back rank. I guess I had realized at this point for the last few moves that I had to worry about back rank threats, but I didn't think that they were so immediate. And what I should have done here is just to gone ahead and made Luft with my pawn so that I wouldn't have to worry about any combinations involving the back rank. I didn't do that. Instead, I took this pawn, as I said, and now Alan uncorked a really nice little move here, queen to e5. And the evaluation goes from -3 in Black's favor, -3 pawns, to dead even. And the best that Black can do, actually, is to force a draw with best play by both sides. And this came as a real shock to me. I sat there at the board for 15 minutes looking for some way to win this game that I thought I'd been winning up till just prior to this move, and couldn't come up with anything forcing. There were lots of bad moves. For example, if I play queen over check, forcing the king to move, he can just move to a safe square, such as c2, where I can't check him easily. And now not only is my rook under attack, but also this knight is under attack. So once I put the rook on a safe square, this knight will be lost. Of course, if I ever take the queen with the rook, then there will be a back rank checkmate with his rook. So I can't afford to do that. The queen is taboo. So what I finally did, after much thought and agonizing, after the queen came out to e5, was to tuck it in on f8. And I thought that I had still a winning line to follow here, but it turns out that with best play, it was a draw at this point. So Alan continued quite sensibly with rook to b8, and I was prepared for that. And the key move that took me a while to see, or at least I thought the key move, was knight to f1. And what this does is a number of things. The knight's on prise, but of course if he takes my knight, then I would take the queen, like so. So that's really not an issue. If the rook takes my rook, then my king will step out and no longer be back ranked mate, and also my queen is guarding this crucial b8 square then. And if the queen were to move, I'm actually threatening to win the rook on b8 with my queen. So I thought this really solved all of my problems. It turns out it doesn't. What you can do is simply trade off the queens, and then trade off the rooks. So like so, and then trade off the rooks. And up, no, this is not it, sorry. This is what I thought he could do. And at first, and I realized I was safe in this variation, and that's why I chose to go down this line. I thought maybe in this variation he would then run his king over to capture this knight, which looks like it's trapped. But I'm in time to go ahead and push my pawn up as he comes over to make a way out for my knight. If he takes it, I just take back with the knight, for example. Or if he comes over, I just take the pawn, and it ends up being a trade of the knights and pawns, and I have a winning king and pawn endgame. So I wasn't worried about that sequence of moves. But what the computer saw that I didn't see in this position was queen takes queen, followed by knight retaking. And now instead of taking my rook, white could simply play rook b1, and now the rook's going to come over and win the knight, and I'm just not quick enough to save it. So rook over, and I play the pawn up, and he just takes the knight. So that's actually probably a winning advantage, certainly a +1 pawn or so advantage for white in this position. So that's what should have happened with ideal play. That's not what happened. Instead, after I played knight to f1, Alan swapped off the rooks, swapped off the queens, and tried to take advantage of his superior position of his king and pawns, that he's a little more active than I am. And since black is 2 pawns up in this position, it turns out it's not quite enough, and my knight doesn't stay trapped forever. So I exchanged off, and then sort of importantly, I started moving a pawn up to ensure that my knight could get out of its trap in the corner. And if I don't, then the king is threatening to come very quickly through f4 and g3 to win it. So I shut down the f4 square. He attacked my pawn. I defended it. He moved away, and then I took the opposition. And now this lets his king come in after my pawn, but that's okay because I can push my g-pawn now. And if he doesn't take it, then it runs very quickly up to g1 and becomes a queen. I just bypassed this pawn. So he did take it. And after that, I retook with the knight. And now this is getting to be quite an easily won knight and pawn endgame, with black being 2 pawns up. So he blockaded with a knight, but now his knight is trapped. I pushed my kingside pawn to get it my a pawn because it's the one that's going to win. It's closest to it's farthest away from white's king and close to the 8th rank now after I've moved it. And so he decided to block it like that. That's not so great because that leaves these 2 knights, these 2 pawns and knights hop away from each other. So it makes it easy for black to scoop them up a little bit later. So after he moved the pawn up, I simply proceeded to go ahead and attack the pawns. He came in to scoop up my h-pawn, but it's a little too slow of a plan. And I'm able to come out, and now being 3 pawns up in this knight and pawn endgame, it was a very easy win, except for the fact that I was down, let's see, on move 42 here, I was down, not sure exactly how much time. In a couple moves from now, I had 1 minute and 30 seconds left for the game. So I was under 2 minutes at this point for the game. But fortunately, the moves are very easy to make, and I didn't play anywhere near an ideal game from here on out, but I just played something solid that I knew should be winning, that I could play quickly. And so I'll go through those moves pretty quickly because they're not that interesting. He comes back and stops my pawn from queening, but all I have to do is to get my knight in to help it. And I maneuver around a little bit with my knight. And bring my king up to help support. And now my knight comes to where it can attack the a1 queening square. And so I get a queen, and that serves to win the knight for me. And now with these 2 pawns, it's a trivial endgame. Now actually, if I'd just played pawn to f2 here, it would have been checkmate next move. But I didn't do that. Of course, I was very short of time. Instead, I checked with the other pawn, seeing that this would be good enough. Attack with the knight. Got a queen protected, which I'm going to keep, and Alan resigned here. So I won. It was a harrowing game. It was the very last game finished. Everyone else had finished for the night, and there were a few people sitting around standing around watching the game and seeing whether or not my clock would expire, but it didn't. I was able to get all the moves in time, and I won. The board one, I was on board 2. The boards 1 and 3 both got upset, so I'm actually going to move up to board 1 next week in round 3. And when I play that game, I'll bring you the analysis from that as well. So until next time, this is Roger saying sayonara.